Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. Someone we haven't had on for a while, but she gets many requests to be on. People are emailing me all the time. Get Catherine Austin Fitts on. What does she think about, well, whatever subject comes up? So today, once again, we have Catherine Austin Fitts of Solari.com, of the famous Solari report that you can find on Solari.com. Catherine Austin Fitts, thank you for joining us today.
Greg, thank you for having me back.
Well, it's good to have you back, and I got a lot of stuff, so let's get right to it. Let's go with Elizabeth Warren. I mean, this is the headline from USA Today, and, Bank of America, caught with fraud. I mean, surprise, surprise. The senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, who's a Harvard contract attorney, scholar.
Yeah.
And smart woman.
Very smart.
She is calling for jailing big bankers. She says nobody has been jailed. It's something that I harp on all the time. The mainstream media, people like Joe Kernan, for example, or MSNBC, they're shaking down, J.P. Morgan Chase and their $13 billion of, how they handled mortgage securities and mortgages and sold mortgages. They had their London whale. There's another $7 billion with, losses and penalties. More than 7 and 20 billion. I don't know how Jamie Dimon keeps his job, let alone no criminal charges. What gives? There are no criminal money laundering for drug cartels, money laundering for countries on the terror list, rate rigging in LIBOR, selling liar loans, no doc loans, bundling them into securities. That'd be securities fraud, would it not? Rating them AAA when indeed they're not. They're buying $40 billion every month of this junk.
Right.
Elizabeth Warren coming out, thank goodness, bless her heart, says, hey, we should jail some of these Wall Street bankers. What say you?
Well, I think it's a lot more complicated than that. There are two things going on, and you have to be careful, Greg, because right now the federal government is dependent on the bankers to finance the government.
That's so sad. That's so sad.
First of all, there is no the government. You have many different agencies and many different factions. You have one pot of money, but if you look at the government is very much, a synthesized organization with the New York Fed banks. They run the government accounts. They do a huge amount of operating and servicing. The government does not have information or financial sovereignty with respect to those banks. Okay. So let's say you took the top 5 New York Fed banks and you put all the top bankers in jail and you shut those operations down. The government wouldn't be able to operate. Okay. Wait a
minute. Now, Elizabeth Warren says that's not true. She says you could put those guys in jail. I mean, the old joke, hey, what's 5 bankers in jail? Big bankers. A good start. Elizabeth Warren says you could put them in jail and it wouldn't be bad. And also, Bill Black, former banking regulator, attorney, professor of law, professor of economics at University of Missouri, Kansas City, says that's preposterous. You can jail these people.
Of course you can jail these people, but then you're going to turn around to the next 10 and say, I want you to go finance the government and do these things to do it. And they're going to say, no, I don't want to go to jail. In other words, you've got a double bind going on. So let me give you an example. You know my red button story.
Oh, yeah. The red button story, how many people would you press the red button if you would clear up all the fraud, but you would lose your 401k, you'd lose your pension?
If the top 5 banks refuse to launder illegal money, then that money would not go through the New York Stock Exchange. It would not finance the government deficit. It would go to markets in Europe. It would go to markets in Asia. And what the American people have made very clear is they want the money coming here. So what are the banks supposed to do? I mean, this is the double bind. So right now, what popular opinion has said again and again and again is that it wants the dirty money. It wants government to be good at warfare all around the world. It wants to play this geopolitical top dog game to the extent it provides subsidy to us. So we can't have our cake and eat it too. If we have a model that's dependent on crime and fraud, then if we don't want to be on that model, then we've got to change the model. But we can't say, bankers, we want you to go off and provide financing to us at subsidized rate and then castigate them when they do the things that they do.
And you're not, for this. You're saying, hey, folks, this is the way it is. You're not a proponent of this. I know that you're an honest person, and you have your business, and you give honest appraisal, and what you're saying is this is just the way it is.
Let's go back. I worked in the Bush administration and tried to stop mortgage fraud, and then was fired. And then my company was hired back into the Clinton administration, and I was successful again at stopping mortgage fraud, and then I was fired. And then I spent 11 years in litigation with the Department of Justice. And that opportunity, if you will, gave me the experience to discover why there was not popular support to stop the mortgage fraud. The housing bubble was not just implemented by Wall Street. It was not just implemented by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It was not just implemented by the Department of Treasury and the Department of Justice. It was implemented by lots of people, both in the private sector and government, in 3,100 counties across the country. This is not them doing it. This is all of us doing this. We are doing this. Now, if you look at what I believe happened between 1995 and to date, which all of this fraud has been a part of, because fraud's just a cover story, Craig. We're talking about, my estimate between 1995 and 2013 is that $40 trillion has been moved out of government and retirement systems, what I call the legacy systems, and shifted into private hands in a variety of ways. And I call that the financial coup d'etat. Now, $40 trillion is not fraud. That's too big to be fraud. That is a policy. That is a plan. That is an economic model. Okay? And that is an economic model that we've all been part of. This is the 50th year of the Kennedy assassination. We all sat and watched the President of the United States be shot, probably 1,000 plus people killed or shot to cover up that story. We sat back and watched that happen. Same thing with 9/11, on and on and on and on. We've been watching this country run by a relatively small group of people centralizing power and using financial fraud as a mechanism to do that, but also to finance enormous amounts of subsidies that we all get. Okay? Because, part of the bargain is why we go along with these things is we get bought into the cover-up, or we get bought into a little bit of the benefits. So this is a deep issue.
Well, from my standpoint too, though, come on. Part of this is not something that we all know. Part of this is the mainstream media lies by omission. And here's one for you.
Greg?
Yeah, here's one for you. If you want to have take a look at what's going on, nobody in Congress, nobody in the House Financial Services Committee, nobody in the Senate Financial Services Committee, nobody in the press, and I can't be the only one who knows this, can ask this question. Which banks are getting $40 billion every month? Which banks?
Greg.
Oh, secret handshake. We can't know that.
Why do the American people still bank at those banks? We have the power to not bank at those banks.
But if
we have the power to We have the power to turn off the media. Why do we still turn it on? Okay? So, we have the power. If you look at how much money we spend on hard narcotics trafficking, if you look at how much time we spend watching this kind of media, if you look at how much money we spend on the lottery, there is enough money under our control to completely redevelop, reinvigorate this country. Okay? So we are doing this. It's not just them.
Yeah, but the mainstream media lies by omission because the things that you're saying...
Why does any... I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell this story again. I've told it before. In 2000, I was at Christian Revival, okay, with my church. And George W. Bush comes in on monitor, and 100,000 Christian women stand up cheering for him. So I turned to my minister and I said, who jumped up cheering for him, I said, there's nothing about Bush family, narcotics trafficking, financial fraud that you don't know. Why are you jumping up and cheering for this guy? And she said, he's going to be the winner. And I said, so he's a winner and I'm a loser? You never jumped up and cheered for me. She said, that's right. He's going to win. In America, we vote we support the winner. We support the winner, the one who can give us the check, who can give us the government benefits, the government contract. That's us. We do this. It's not just them. And the reason I bring this up is if you want to change it, then you've got to look at it and you've got to change it. You've got to change it in your own pocketbook. You got to change it in your own life. You got to change it in your own home. You got to change it in your own community. You know, if you want to put the bankers in jail, be careful, because if you put the bankers in jail, then you know something, they're not going to finance you anymore.
Yeah, but you know what? In the end, they're going to kill our society. They're killing our society.
Greg, I'm with you.
That's what the spying's about. That's what the drone kills are about.
I pushed the red button in in the Bush administration. I pushed the red button in the Clinton administration. I've been, if you go to the Solari report is helping every person in America who wants the help to push the red button. But what I'm telling you is, we have to do it. You can't just say, oh, wham, 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 wham. It's them. They're bad guys.
Well, listen, your credentials are sterling, and you're one of the good guys. Let me just get that out first and foremost. I don't want people thinking that I'm taking you to task because you're bad. You're not. You're good. That's why I have you on.
But I have more experience than anyone I know on this entire planet on what happens when you engage with American citizens on not participating. In other words, this is the Patty Hearst syndrome. We are all, what do you call it? We are all part of facilitating this.
So, but wait a minute now. This whole American scheme works only if the rest of the world buys into it, buys in that the dollar's worth something, buys in that Treasury bonds will be redeemed someday for more money than they put in and to make up for the interest. But we're seeing cracks in the system. I mean, we're seeing this NSA spying, and not only just G20 nations, as you brought up a month or so ago, but 35 leaders, including Angela Merkel, who's upset, angry. You see the European Parliament blocking the U.S. out of global financial data banks. You see the Saudis, who are upset for another reason, saying they're going to have a, quote, major shift in relations between the U.S. They hold, $700 billion in Treasury bonds. I mean, we're starting to see a shift away from the dollar, are we not?
Well, we have a global system. Okay, the dollar, no one buys the dollar because they like us. They buy the dollar because we're the big 800-pound gorilla. Our Navy controls the sea lanes. Our Navy plus military control the satellite lanes. We have a system which is run by force. And they participate, for two reasons. One is if they don't, they'll run into the problems of not being able to, trade oil or do whatever. But the other reason is that they think we're going to win. They vote for the winner. Okay. And the winner is the person who's got the military. So this is I call it the central banking warfare model. Now, are there cracks in the system? Yes. The more it is obvious that the system works off of force, the more invasive the force gets, the more pushback there's going to be, both globally and here domestically. And what we're all talking about is, we don't like being run in a centralized model that's run by force. And the problem, Greg, is it's shrinking the pie. If nobody trusts anybody, how can you have a healthy economy? One of the things that's causing the deflation globally is nobody trusts anybody, and everybody's so busy engaging in economic warfare, they can't use the financial system to transact.
Well, that's so sad. A financial system really run by force, not run by commerce and a good deal and, people getting mutual benefit off of transactions. That's so sad. And I can't say that's a business model that lasts.
But let's talk about culture. One of my favorite countries in the world is Switzerland. And one of the reasons I love to spend time in Switzerland is because you're in a country where the individual person really does believe in democracy and really does believe in democratic process and really does respect human rights and property rights. Day to day, if you look at what I do, my biggest problem is not interference by Washington and Wall Street. My biggest problem is corruption within the body politic. The corruption of average people. I mean, we've reached a level of corruption in this country which is very significant, but it's everybody.
I just don't see how a financial system thrives under a backdrop of corruption and fraud. I mean, I just don't see. I'm sure there's some study somewhere that'll say that, but how does that happen? How you have to believe in the game. You have to believe that it's not rigged, that you are not going to have your money, bailed in, that you're not going to have your retirement funds, replaced with treasury bonds that'll evaporate.
So
you have to be involved in a system that is.
Right. But let's talk about, because when you want to solve a problem, the first thing you need is power, right? You need power to solve that. We don't want to just sit here and whine, okay? I mean, part of it is when I don't like something, I want to know, okay, well, what can I do? So the question is, what can we do? The first thing we can all do is we can withdraw. We can, within the system, whether it's the United States or globally, we have good people in business. We have good people in leadership. We have good people in military. Let's support them. If you look at who we support with our time, with our attention or our money, we're supporting the bad guys. It's just like the story of the crucifixion. We're not voting to let Jesus out of jail. We're voting to let the criminal out of jail.
Barabbas.
Yeah. I mean, when I go through my daily life, whether professionally or personally, what I find is tremendous support in situation after situation, whether politically or in business, for the criminals.
I mean, look at here. Hold on. Here's your support. Here's USA Today. This rag of what does it say? Teflon diamond. I'm talking about Teflon diamond. And this guy lost $20 billion for his bank this year, right, and he's still got a job. We have to have him. He's the smartest guy in the room.
The American people have the power to say, something? We are going to shun J.P. Morgan Chase. We're not going to talk to them. We're not going to bank with them. When a business banks with them, we're going to scream at that business and tell them we're not going to do business with them if they bank with them. When we go to cocktail parties, if somebody says they work at J.P. Morgan Chase, we can turn and walk away. If our kid comes home and says they're going to marry somebody from J.P. Morgan Chase, no, they're not welcome in the family. We have the power to completely shun and blackball all these people to the point where suddenly people like Senator Warren can get some real legs in getting them changed. Okay? So why aren't we doing that? That's what I don't understand.
Well, Gerald Celente, we've changed the subject here. Gerald Celente says he thinks there'll be a currency devaluation sometime in the first quarter of 2014. He thinks we're on that shaky of ground that, we have this $17 trillion, debt. We have another couple of trillion to raise the debt ceiling if they want to do it past the 2000 midterm elections. He thinks, and I'm sure he thinks that the Saudi Arabian thing is dollar negative. I think that, the Europeans upset about the spying and locking us out of the global data system, financial data system, dollar negative. I think all the debt, dollar negative. I mean, aren't there a lot of dollar negatives out there? Do you think we may have a currency devaluation sometime in 2014?
It's possible, but what we've got globally is a race to the bottom on all the currencies. So what you've got in the developed world is choking on its debt. What we've done for decades is we've borrowed a huge amount of money and used that money to build out a new infrastructure. And so in the United States, for example, we have what I call the legacy systems, which is we have Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and there's not enough assets to back the system as currently configured. And there's a political process that has to go on how you reconcile those assets to those liabilities. And that's a political process. Now, there's no way we're covering that.
I mean, Lawrence Kotlikoff, the economics professor at Boston University, says, if you did just GAAP accounting, any student, a graduate student would do, you'd come up with more than $200 trillion in commitments in debt.
But there are many things they can do, but essentially what they're going to do is they're going to change the retirement age. So the retirement age is going to get moved up another 5, years plus. And then they're going to debase the currency and, they're just going to grind it out. And meantime, everybody's going to pay for Obamacare. And just as Carl Denninger so eloquently said when he was on your show, when they show up at the hospital to get the benefits, they'll find out it's not covered. And, it's going to be the ultimate fraud. So they have I call it the 26-step process as to how they're going to grind that out. But one of the reasons that the dollar is not as weak as I think you think it is because they pulled that 40 trillion out and said, you know something, we're not going to spend that 40 trillion dollars on retirement benefits and nursing homes. We're going to spend that 40 trillion dollars on things that make us unbelievably powerful and strong. Okay.
Well, it's only a few people because the rest of the country is doing. I was just at a pawn shop today in my area, and I stopped by. I was getting some work done on my car, and I said, "Yeah, I stopped by High Point, North Carolina. It's a big pawn shop, very reputable people." I said, "How's the economy going?" He looked at me and says, "What are you talking about? It sucks. It's terrible."
Right.
So for the rich, that's fabulous. The 40 trillion. For the rest of the 90, 95, 98%, that's not so fabulous.
Right. Right. Now it's very interesting. When in throughout the 90s and 98, throughout the 2000, I was part of a group of people who took plans and said, you know, let's, instead of shifting all the money and stealing the 40 trillion, let's re-engineer the economy, in fact, so the middle class can make it. Okay? Not a whole lot of interest in that plan, Greg. Everybody was having fun in the bubble. Then in the 2000, you know, I and many other people tried to warn people. No one was interested. They were having fun in the bubble. Okay? So, you know, now we're at the end game.
What's the end game? What's the end game? Let's get down to brass tacks. How's this going to affect the normal person? You're talking about inflation, so I evidently should have gold, silver, hard assets, diamonds, artwork, land, a house.
Let me tell you how it's going to affect the person, because basically what I do as a business, whether it's as an investment advisor or as published with the Solari Report, is I help people every day learning how to transition from the way the world was 10 years ago to the way the world's going to be 10 years from now, you know, as best we can guess it. And what I have to tell you, the most important thing that anybody can do has nothing to do with your finances. It has to do with your psychology. Okay? We are in a transition. We have experienced a financial coup d'etat. It is what it is. And if you get angry in a way, well, let me stop and tell a story. I went through a process, Greg, in 1995. I was an extremely wealthy, successful person. Okay? And I went through a process where I was targeted by the federal government. And literally one day I'm a highly wealthy, highly credentialed, successful person. And the next day it's like the movie Enemy of the State. You know, I'm targeted. Lies are being spread in the press. I'm facing a smear campaign. My own family members won't speak to me. They think I'm a serial killer. All my credit is cut off. All my business is cut off. You know, I'm suddenly loaded down with 12 different tracks of litigation, 18 audits, investigation. And I literally go from being, you know, having an amazing cash flow to having to run a highly complex business with no help on $2,000 a month. Okay? So literally you go from having a monthly cash flow of $1 million a month to $2,000 a month, and you're still supposed to run this highly complicated operation. You know, so I went through the beatdown, and I'll never forget in 1998, I'm sitting in a mansion in Washington, and literally I was dealing with very life and death physical harassment. Okay. In addition to the litigation and the audits and investigations. And literally, Greg, my face was turning black. And I looked in the mirror one day and I realized, you know, you're not going to make it. If this keeps up, you're going to die. You're not going to make it.
Which is probably what they wanted.
I was being attacked. You know, they were raising my expenses. They were lowering my revenues. They were cutting off my credit. They were doing things that destroyed all the assets on my balance sheet. So I was getting hit by multiple things on all sides. And to a certain extent, that's what's happening to everybody in America. Okay. So I just had the opportunity to go through the beatdown early. So I said, you know, I'm not going to make it. And this is really dangerous. I need to go back and look at other people that this has happened to. I need to figure out who succeeded and who didn't and why, because I need a jump the curve plan. I'm not going to make it. So I went back and studied other people who had been targeted. And you know what I discovered? The ones who didn't make it, you know what killed them? Their own anger. They got poisoned by their own anger. They got so angry that the people around them got, you know, sort of pushed away, and they literally made themselves physically sick. And that's when I realized, you know, this is dangerous. I have a group of people who are literally trying to kill me. And if I'm going to win, I have to I have to let go of what I'm losing. I have to let go of the grief, and I have to figure out how to be effective at this. And I will tell you very honestly, I had a fabulous church who was an expert at spiritual warfare. And they taught me how to win in a situation when you're David and you're up against Goliath. Okay? You're a little guy and you have minimal resources and you're up against all the money on the planet. Okay? It's a very scary thing.
Oh, I know. My site's attacked all the time. I've been knocked off the air.
Right.
I'm sure people hate me because I can point out the fact that, hey, which banks are getting $40 billion every month? And nobody,
Right.
and the fact that nobody is asking that question, which I find disgusting. In the journalism circles, I find that disgusting. Really, that's too big to miss.
The banks, I can only talk from the mortgage, business. But in my experience, the government and the banks had a public-private partnership engineering mortgage fraud. They did it together. It was a partnership. It's very difficult for the government to turn around to JP Morgan Chase and say, we're putting you in jail for being our partner in this business.
Sad.
I mean,
let's move on to what should people look out for?
Well, but let me just say one thing. These guys were financing the black budget. The reason the mortgage fraud has been going on, from what I can tell from, at least the 70s that I tracked it.
Yeah, you were in there. Just so people know, you were the assistant secretary of housing in the Bush administration. First
Bush administration.
Yeah,
so I was the federal housing commissioner.
Yeah.
So that money has been financing the black budget. And what you'll find, and part of the black budget, if you go into any neighborhood in this country, if you get a group of soccer moms together and you try and back the mortgage fraud and the narcotics trafficking out of your neighborhood, what you discover is you're up against Tony Soprano. And if you get rid of Tony Soprano, the next thing you know, you got James Bond and black helicopters and men in black coming down on you. And why is that? Because that crime, that Tony Soprano operation, is financing the black budget. And the black budget is deeply dependent. You've got deep national security council issues that are deeply financially dependent, which is why if we really want to address this, the first thing we need is transparency. What we need is a diagnosis that makes sense. What is the black budget about? Where has this $40 trillion gone? What is really going on? What's the real governance system of the planet? We don't know. And every time I've tried to get a popular conversation going about that, everybody says, oh, no, that's not socially acceptable. I don't want to talk about that.
Well, let's talk about this.
Okay.
So we're not going to get all that stuff answered.
Right.
And I know people are headed for hard times, which is what my site's about.
We're not headed for hard times. We're in hard times.
Okay, so we're not coming out anytime soon, doesn't look like, because they're not finished with Obamacare and putting this in, which is going to be some great. I mean, the Republicans are going to tap dance on the Democrats over this in 2014. I'm either Democrat or Republican.
Nobody's going to tap dance on anybody about this, because here's, the American people are not going to celebrate that the Republicans tried to get something done. They're going to be mad at everybody. Okay? So nobody's going to win from this. When you try to legislate the destruction of an economy, no one's going to be happy and nobody's going to win out of that. Okay? People are going to die. We're talking about depopulation. I think Obamacare is, part of something which is much, much worse. So let me go back and just, to give you an example.
Themselves?
How can people protect themselves? Okay, Greg, every person is different. Every situation is different. But the first thing you need to know is the government can't help you. The government is not your friend. You're talking about a very deep system that's got 100 trillion plus of liabilities, and, it's got 60 cents on the dollar to fulfill those liabilities. And so, everything they say, whether intentionally or not, is going to turn out or may turn out to be a lie, and you've just got to know that.
So
okay.
You get your money out of the system. Jim Sinclair at JS Mindset, Mr. Gold, says you need to get your money out of the system. You need to invest in other stuff. Get clear title to your house. Get clear title to your car. Get some gold. Get some silver.
What you need to do is you need to go, and everybody's different. You need to go through your income statement, and you need to go through your balance sheet. And the first thing you need to do is you need to look at your time. Okay? when you go through your time, you need to stop giving your time to these people. So you need to stop spending 200 hours a year trying to get some insurance company to make good on their promise, when they're probably not going to do it. You need to stop spending time watching media and TV and ingesting all the lies. Do you know what I mean? So the first thing you need...
I'm making a living off of telling people what's the truth, so...
Right. So you need to stop ingesting entrainment, subliminal programming, and crap. That's number one. The second thing is you need to get all the criminals out of your income statement and balance sheet. Stop giving them your bank deposits. Stop giving them your purchases. Stop giving them your data, if you can at all. So just, I call it come clean. You got to clean out your own, get these guys out of your life, get them out of your head, get them out of your mind, whatever. The second thing you need to understand is the water and food supply is not safe. Okay? And if you're going to make it through this period, you need to be able to think clearly. You need to be healthy. So anything you can do to build a supply of fresh food and fresh, clean water, you need to really, sometimes I say to people, sometimes us right-wing wackos are really right about certain things. And when it comes to the problems with the food supply, there it is. Okay, then you need to go through your assets and investments and understand they need to be very diversified. If you're in New Orleans, Katrina can come. We're in an environment where these kinds of things can happen. And when they happen, you need to know that you're on your own. Okay, so you're trying to build resiliency and you're trying to build, the kind of mental and physical health you need to be successful in this environment. And that's why I'm telling you, do not get poisoned on your own anger. It's always funny when I do your show, you'll see these comments of people saying, oh, this woman is immoral. I'm not trying to be immoral. I'm trying to talk about this in a dispassionate way.
And I want to say that I think you're a straight shooter. I think you're saying, hey, this is the way it is. You got to deal with the way it is, not the way you want it to be. I got that. So
we all need to understand psychologically, while we're putting cash in the system, they were saying, oh, sweetie, baby, honey, they were coddling us. Now that we want the cash back, it's like, do you see what I mean?
Yeah. So should people buy gold and silver? If you can afford it? Should you buy food? Let's start with gold and silver. Should people buy gold and silver?
I think gold and silver are a very useful investment for the worst case. They may not be a very good investment for the scenario we're in right now. It wouldn't surprise me if equities outperformed them going forward. But it's a much more complicated thing. We're in an environment where any asset class can go into the doghouse in very arbitrary and capricious ways. And the volatility, both financially and politically, is extraordinary. So you don't want to bet the ranch on any particular asset. My concern with gold and silver is you hear so many people talking as though gold and silver is a magic bullet that's going to protect you in the worst case. What we all need to understand is we have a political problem. And you can't solve a political problem with a financial strategy or a financial reengineering. We don't have a financial problem. We have a political problem. We have a group of people who are governing this planet, who are using force to do it. They have unbelievable weaponry and the ability to implement force. The vast majority of us in our day-to-day jobs and lives are supporting them. If anything, we're encouraging them. We're giving them energy.
But you can take your money out of the system by putting it in gold and silver, can you not? I mean, that does protect you in some way.
You can do a whole variety of things that will increase the chances that you will be more resilient. So you can have resilient supplies of food. You can do extraordinary things to invest in both a home base and energy and other systems that significantly lower your expenses. The less cash I need, the more resilient I am. I'll give you a perfect example. When the Department of Justice tried to cut off all my sources of revenue and credit, you know what happened? It turns out I had lent or given as gifts $250,000 to family and friends. And everybody got together and said, well, I guess she needs it back. And they couldn't cut that money off because, there were no contracts. There was no rules. I had just given or loaned it. And people, out of the goodness of their heart or their generosity, dug deep and sent it back to me. And it was that money that kept me alive.
let's go back to Obamacare, depopulate. You think they want to starve people's care, and oh yeah, you can have your cancer treatment in 7 months. You can have that need done in a year. Is that what you're talking about? Depopulate?
Well, here's the thing: when you pull this much money out of retirement systems and out of the governmental systems that are supposed to provide additional retirement systems, the net result is people are not going to get what they expected, and that's going to put unbelievable stress on them. But let me give you a more concrete example. Back in the 90s, and I wrote about this in my online book, Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits, we were, the U.S. government was dropping SWAT teams of people into poor neighborhoods, rounding up kids, stuffing them in prison. And if you look at what we were doing as part of the war on drugs, there was no difference between what we were doing and what Hitler was doing with the Jews, other than, we weren't running them through gas chambers that I know of yet. But there was no doubt about it that the process, when you bring drugs into a community and then you run an enforcement process that rounds up innocent kids, put them in slave labor camps where you put them, the Department of Justice sort of shuffles them out to make Pentagon, make, what is it called, uniforms for the Pentagon. You're doing something which is I would describe as genocide.
So you're telling me that this was basically the same thing that Hitler was doing, it's just in a more modified, cleaner way without ovens.
Well, but let me go back to facing what we're all part of. How did we get this land? Most of us had ancestors, one way or another, who were part of a process where we came here, we killed everybody who was here, and we stole their land, right? I mean, that's how we created the country in the first place, right? Okay?
Yes.
So, and then we had a whole, financing the building out of a part of the infrastructure with slavery, right?
Yes.
Right?
At least in part of the country.
Right. And then after the slaves went free, what did we do? We went through a process of targeting those communities with drugs and, Lord knows what else. And I'm telling the story in the 90s of how we literally rounded up innocent kids, stuffed them into prison, made money on the prison stocks. After, if you look at who was bringing in the drugs, it was, it was a genocide policy. There was nothing we were doing, minus the gas chambers that wasn't the same as the slave labor camps that Hitler was doing. Now, that's our country. That's what we've been doing. We, a group of our leadership got together and assassinated the president of the United States, in front of all of us. It was filmed. We've all watched the films many times. We let them get away with that. Okay, this has been going, this is a very old,
well, we were told all the time, all the while, that if anybody questioned it, they were crazy, they were wacky, they were whack jobs. That's what we were told. That's what the mainstream media said. And, my thing, if you want to
watch the mainstream media.
But I know, but people don't, that's the mainstream media until the internet age pretty much had control of everything, Catherine. I mean, my thing is, if you want me to believe the Kennedy assassination, I just released two things: an unredacted Warren Commission report and all the autopsy photos. That's never going to happen.
My understanding is, if you look at the polls, most Americans believe there was a conspiracy.
We had a change of government without an election.
Right. Right. So this has been going on for a long, long time.
So,
and if we're going to change it, then we have to change it. We can't just say, let's put some bankers in jail. We have to go deep. We have to look at because let's face it, Greg, one of the ways that we've all had a nice middle class life in this country is our military runs around the world and, kills people and takes natural resources for cheap. And that's hunky dory with all of us because, it's the basis of our nice life.
Final question here. Paul Craig Roberts, you know who he is, former Assistant Treasury Secretary. He was out with a post recently saying, hey, 2014 is the year of collapse. What say you?
I think 2014 is the year when the legacy systems go through a very ugly period, including some of them collapsing. I don't think we'll have a collapse because I think the $40 trillion the money that's been shifted out will be a reinvestment, and part of the reason that was done was to avoid that kind of collapse. So no, I don't think there's
going to be a collapse for the people in Detroit. It's going to be a collapse for people in Chicago. It's going to be a collapse for anybody getting a government check.
anybody dependent on the legacy systems is going to be in a very difficult, ugly position and may collapse. Yes.
That's half
If
the
you,
country, basically.
if you come to where I live, we've been collapsing for a long time now. You know, the collapse has been going on in many communities all over the country for 2 decades.
And couldn't the dollar
So,
take a big whacking? Couldn't the dollar take a big chunk down? Couldn't they revalue the currency and say, hey, that you had $10, you get one new dollar? Couldn't something like that happen?
I think I would look at this, you know, because my beatdown started earlier than everybody's else, you know, I just look at this in a very different way. Here's the way I look at it. For 250, you know, plus years, since 1776 in this country, we've been talking about respecting each other's rights, but we've financed it by running around the world stealing from everybody else. You know, not to mention stealing the land that we're sitting on. So the time has come where we have to shift the model. We can't stay on the central banking warfare model. We've been using that for 500 years. It's not going to work because we're so busy killing each other, and the economic warfare is so absurd and so ridiculous that we're shrinking the total pie. And that means we need to change a model where we're prepared globally to respect each other's human and property rights.
But couldn't the dollar be revalued? Couldn't, in this collapse of legacy systems, or Paul Craig Roberts, the former Assistant Treasury Secretary in the Reagan administration, isn't the dollar going to come under attack? I mean, the dollar is the Treasury bond. I mean, they are joined at the hip. Couldn't the dollar be revalued? Isn't that going to be the big moment where everybody goes, oh, I get my government check, but a loaf of bread is $40?
Here's the thing. You know, what I hear from you, Greg, is that because of what is being done, you know, we are the target of a centralization process which is so despicable and so ugly, and we hate it. And we think that the dollar will collapse and it will all stop. That's a fantasy. Now, I'm not saying these guys are going to succeed, but if we want to stop what's going on, the way to do it is not to pray for the collapse of the dollar.
I'm asking if it will happen. I'm not
I
praying
think
for
it's
it.
unlikely. I think it's very unlikely.
That the dollar is going to lose value.
Well, it's relative. We have a race to the bottom of all currencies. Okay? And there's no doubt that the well-being of the general populations in the developed world, whether Europe, Japan, and America, is in for a major readjustment. But that was a fait accompli once we adopted the Uruguay round of GATT and went to this process of rebalancing the global economy. That was all part of rebalancing. So I think the question is, are we as a planet going to institute a totalitarian central government? Or are we going to find a way out of this kind of economic warfare existence that we live in? And that's going to require a deep cultural change, bottom up, throughout all the worlds, not just the United States, but Europe and Japan and the developed world.
I see the sun shining through on your shoulders there, and it almost looks like a angelic light on you, like, ooh. Could you see that? Anyway, but I know I want to come down to the street level, though. I mean, you're way up here in the, PhD level. And, people are going to wake up one day and find out their currency is going to be devalued. That's the only way this makes sense, isn't it?
Their currency has been devaluing for 20 years.
I know, but it's going to go into hyperdrive at some point. That's the problem.
It already went into hyperdrive. Between it's up on the blog. I did a calculation over a 5-year period. I think it was 1990 to 1995. A community of 100,000 people on average lost $3.3 billion of purchasing power from debasement of their currency. So don't say it's going to happen. It's happening.
Well, I know it's been a process, but Paul Craig Roberts says collapse 2014, and you say?
Not a chance.
Not a chance.
Not a chance. No, I mean, anything's possible in this kooky world because the politics and the warring can get so ridiculous. But I give it 2.5%.
And if the Saudis say, you know what, we're going to take payment in any currency, we're going to take payment in rial, rupee, euro, pound sterling, yuan, we'll take payment anywhere. What does that do to the dollar if they do that?
Well, I think the question is, will they be able to stick to that? And I think the answer is no.
You don't think they'll do it?
I don't think they'll do it, or if they do it, they'll do it in a way that it won't be a problem for the people who govern the G7.
Catherine Austin Fitts, you're fantastic. You're one of the good guys. I want people to know that. I think you're one of the good guys. You got beat downs. I hope I'm not going to get a beat down anytime soon. Do you think? Are you going to make it late wager a prediction I'll get a beat down here?
We're living in a world where if you do what you and I do, you have to deal with what can I tell you? Everybody's angry. Everybody's mad. Everybody's throwing stuff. Everybody's fighting dirty. We as a culture, we do not have the basis of a market economy culturally.
Well, I hope I can stay on the air with USA Watchdog. Catherine Austin Fitts of the Solari Report that you can find on Solari.com. Thank you so much for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com for a really long, very extensive interview and an insight into your wonderful intellect and experience. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you, Greg. Have a great day.
You too.